Okay. Thank you all for being here, and we'll get going. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Blessed Lord, who caused all holy scriptures to be written for our learning, grant us so to hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that we may embrace and ever hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life, which you have given us in our Savior Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Okay. Last week, as we started talking about what we were seeing as the Acts of the Apostles begins, um, seeing the disciples having to step out of that place of fear and having to step into a place of beginning to do ministry as they saw Jesus doing ministry. And of course, the first thing that we talked about, let me stop this for just a sec. First thing we talked about was really seeing the disciples um, being called out of their place and being called into a place of being able to speak languages that they didn't know they could speak so that they could communicate well with all of the people of God's world. That kind of message that God did not want the word to be excluded from anyone. And so all of a sudden, all these folks in Jerusalem are hearing the word in their own languages. And immediately we realize that a whole new thing has opened up for the folks who are followers. They're able to hear and interpret things in ways that they hadn't been able to hear and interpret them before. Hearing things in their own language and hearing things in their own tongue and being included. And now we start to see what these first days are like for all the folks who are still around and trying to make sense out of this new world and this new paradigm. What does it mean to be followers? Because we understand that all these people are being added, we're told. They're being added to the number of followers that are there. They're absorbing the word, they're absorbing this message, they're absorbing this sense of kind of radical inclusion. And they then devote themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, the breaking of bread, and the prayers, which is, I mean, that those words are the exact words that we find in our baptismal covenant. That is one of the things that we commit to ourselves and to God and to one another that we're going to do is to do exactly that. And then we get to this wonderful, awe coming upon all the believers here in chapter 2 of Acts. And we start to see the next shift in things. Now that the words have been understood by everyone, and everyone is devoting themselves to this teaching and fellowship and to the breaking of bread and prayers. Well, now that they are united in that way, that they are connected in this way that they had not been connected before, awe comes upon everyone, and we get this wonderful verse 44. And we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about verse 44 and all the ramifications that kind of fall from verse 44. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. And I'm going to stop there for a second before we go on with this whole notion of having what we own in common. That this is a different look at stewardship, right? I mean, God gave it to us, and so therefore communally we own it and we give to one another as we have need. I mean, we see that kind of giving and sharing. Um, Memphis, my former home, has been said to be one of the most generous and philanthropic places in the country. That's what folks say. I see Jenny's kind of giving me that look. But Memphis is said to be one of the most generous and philanthropic places in the country, because the level of giving to nonprofits and churches in Memphis is said to be particularly high. That makes me wonder about other places in the country. I mean, honestly, because I mean, there's a lot of poverty in Memphis. If you see my workshop, I talk about poverty here in Mississippi, but I also talk about poverty in Memphis. There's a lot of poverty in Memphis. So for a very generous and philanthropic place, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to kind of lift everyone up to a healthy and sustainable place. But this notion of the people holding what they had in common and selling and using the proceeds to care for one another as they need. You know, the first thing I hear when I'm preaching on this text, when it comes along in the lectionary and I'm preaching on it, people will say that's just socialism. And that's not how we want to live our lives, is it? We don't really want our lives to be socialism. Um, and I guess that for me goes back to a question of whose property was it to start with? Because if we believe it was God's to start with and it's just entrusted to us while we are doing what we're doing here in our earthly bodies, if we start with a notion that whatever it is I've got because of God and it's God's, and therefore my heart should be a generous heart because I should be worried about how I take care of my neighbors and not just ignoring the need around me, then that doesn't sound like socialism to me. That sounds like literally saying the only reason I have it, the only reason it's in my possession anyway, is because God showed favor and allowed me to use it. And so, therefore, if I'm allowed to use it, then I should be always thinking, how am I using it for the betterment of all the folks around me? And I think that that's a place where we all just get stuck. It's ours, and it's not what God has given us for us, just as any other gift or talent that we have. It's ours, and it's ours as we are entrusted with it, and we are then to figure out how are we called to use it to bring about God's kingdom. That's a whole different way of looking at everything we have, whether it's our, our money, our other assets, or whether it's looking at our gifts as human beings. When we start to unpack this a little bit, um, yeah, when we start to unpack it a little bit, then we're going to see some really cool things begin to happen in this text. I think we see some cool things happening in this text. And what we see in Acts 4, um, is now the whole group of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one claimed private ownership of any possessions, but everything they owned was held in common. With great power, the apostles gave their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. There was not a needy person among them. That's a startling line, isn't it? There was not a needy person among them, for as many as owned lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold. They laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as any had need. There was a Levite, a native of Cyprus, Joseph, to whom the apostles gave the name Barnabas, which means son of encouragement. He sold a field that belonged to him and laid it at the apostles' feet. And what I want us to take a few minutes now to do is just, I want to hear how you're reflecting on hearing that text from the Acts of the Apostles. What things come to mind for you as you hear that?
Dorothy, I had growing up, was very much formed by the fact that um, my parents and family were involved with the beginning of a new Methodist church, and uh, it. We had the spirit of sharing everything, of sharing our time, our resources. None of us had, by today's standards, we didn't have a lot of resources. But what we did have, we very much shared. And as I've become older and wiser, I've come to understand uh, that I have had an experience with that few other people have. And I think, with my faith journey as an adult, and particularly in recent years, just really, frankly, struggling with organized religion, um, and the focus on the institution of the church itself, as opposed to this community of believers.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
so I am fortunate again that I grew up with this thing. We were just all in it together. Uh, we made do with what we had. We certainly had, we were Methodist, so we certainly had support from the General Conference,
Mhm.
but it was a very minimum level of support. So, but I find now, and even in my own journey, like the thought of selling everything I have and just giving it away, I just don't think I'm comfortable. I'll be honest. I just don't know how I feel about that, to be honest.
Mhm.
Um, I'd, I'd like to think a community of believers uh, could get to this point, but it does seem that we've put a lot of barriers in our way,
Mm. Mm.
particularly in our civilization, in our Western civilization in the United States.
Yep. Regina.
And I think for me, it's a trust and a faith issue. And I think we as Christians struggle with both. I mean, and we got it honestly. I mean, if Eve and Adam had trusted and had faith that that whole situation was going to be good, then this whole existence would look a little bit differently. So I think for the most part, we struggle with that. And so for me, it's all right, how do I get to a point where I am okay with just because if I trust God and I see God in everyone, okay, then I should be able to extend that trust to others in this way. And I think because I struggle with the first two things, seeing God in folks in order to trust them to be, you know, uh conscientious, be, truthful, be honest, be genuine about their efforts is like a loop. It's like a continuous circle of, I'm struggling with all of that. So my first thing was, what were they eating and what were they praying that made them want to do that? I mean, because I was like, um, I want some of that food and I want some of those prayers prayed over me. But all jokes aside, I think for us that is, and I speak from my own personal, but I can probably say it's us too from some of the nods that it's a faith and a trust thing.
I think it is. And um, so there's an organization in Memphis. It's the Meals on Wheels organization, MIFA. And I guess it's been maybe 3 weeks ago now. They had a day where the goal for the day was to get longtime MIFA givers and new givers, but particularly folks who were already connected to MIFA, because Meals on Wheels is not getting the federal support that it had been getting. And so the idea was we're going to have a day that we're going to ask folks to give us a day of meals, like just cough it up, give us some money, and they reached more than four times what they had set for the goal for the day because people were literally out on social media saying, so I see MIFA's trying to raise all this money today, and I just want you to know I'm helping MIFA raise this money today. And so I'm like looking at all these people with little videos saying, "Yep, it's me. I'm trying to help MIFA today. Please try to help MIFA today." And by the end of the day, they had raised more than four times what they had set as their goal. And they're feeding seniors. Like they're feeding folks who don't have food. And I've delivered many of my meal. I've delivered many of my meal. And I can tell you that even though those meals seem small, like the first time I delivered my meals, I was like, it was because somebody had said to me, this might be all the food that somebody sees the whole day. And I thought, if this is all the food they're seeing all day today, this is not a lot of food. Like this is not a lot for a senior if this is the only thing they might have that entire day. And to see the gratitude, when you pull up and knock on that door and say, I'm from MIFA, I'm bringing your meal, to see the gratitude, but also to see the need and to see the need that MIFA had stepped into, that was huge. It was huge. I mean, huge enough for me that I ended up becoming MIFA's board chair. I got so invested in that work that I ended up becoming a board chair. Um, and so it's moments like that that I think, well, yeah, we do have moments. We have moments that we realize there's something going on here that's bigger than me, and I need to support that thing, and I need to get behind that thing with 100% of my effort. Um, because yeah, you go do it one time. That's what I would encourage people is just go deliver meals one time. Just whatever you think. Go pick up that cooler and go deliver some meals one time, once. That will do you because when you see how some of these seniors are living and see what the need is, that'll transform you. And that's the moment that you think, okay, do I really need that new pair of shoes? No, I really don't need that new pair of shoes. And I really don't need that new jacket. And I really don't need another chair in my house. I really don't need any of that stuff. And what would happen if I just stopped and said, I don't need those things and I can take all that money and I can feed some seniors? Like that's a whole bunch of people I can feed from things that I don't have to have. Um,
Well, I
yeah,
think some of this comes back to the trust issue too,
it does. It
because
does.
in trusting MIFA, and I think there were a couple visionary leadership continually at MIFA from the beginning till now, broad community involvement,
Hmm.
you know. I think too, the other thing I would say about those meals, Dorothy, it's not just it's being fed spiritually, and I don't mean just the seniors, ourselves.
Hmm. Hmm.
If so I do think that that is a lot of it, but I think it comes back to the whole trust issue. And I think that's something that an organization like MIFA and other organizations that are effective like that, they have. That trust is there. But I think it's a perfect example of seeing the effect, seeing the need, and seeing how there is a program that is very effective in meeting it. So thank you for sharing about MIFA.
Yeah, I mean that day just kind of blew me away. Because I mean, by the time I don't stay on social media, so by the time I actually saw all these posts, I mean, like all these people were posting, today's the day, we're gonna give all this money to MIFA today, we're gonna do it, we're gonna do it, we're gonna do it. And so by the time I saw it, I was like, oh, let me get on right now and give Micah some money. Um, and then to find out the next morning they had more than quadrupled their original ask. Um, that said to me, at some level, we get it, but it is probably a trust issue, like you said, Jenny, because we trust that the folks that MIFA's feeding need to be fed. Like we're trusting that, and we're trusting them to do the work that they're telling us that they're doing.
Yeah.
And
And I think
and
that's
that
the other difference with the acts. They were actually seeing what was happening with the funds. They were seeing what was happening with the resources that they were, donating and trusting whatever, you want to use. And I think for us in modern day times, unless we have that, like a MIFA or something where we could actually see the
Mm-hmm.
evidence of the good work, we struggle. And I think churches in particular is one of those places. We see enough,
Mhm.
social media posts about preachers and jets and all the things. And so I think that when the church tries to get back to this way of thinking, this whole mindset, um, it's hard because we got that baggage in our ear, those distractions in our ears.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I just remember being a kid, and I won't name the televangelist. I won't name. But my parents watched a particular televangelist who, as it turned out, I mean, sometime later, folks actually figured out how much wealth this person had accumulated, which was just like unspeakable and enormous. Gold fixtures in their bathrooms, and I mean, and just all this kind of crazy stuff. Um, and and I thought about, my parents sharing money with that televangelist, and I'm thinking, why would you do that? Like, what do you think that person is going to do with this money? Like, well, what do you even think is going to happen with this money? Because even as a kid, I'm looking around the church that my parents attended at the folks who lived in that neighborhood and saying, it seems like this church ought to be doing a whole lot more for the people who live here. Like I don't understand any of this. I don't understand this kind of abject poverty right outside the doors of the church, and the church not being way more committed in my little girl eyes to taking care of the folks who lived right around it. Um, those were some hard moments for me as a kid. Um, yeah. Because you don't know what's happening when you give money to stuff. You don't know what is being done unless it's something as transparent as a MIFA, where you literally know how many seniors are being fed. I mean, they issue reports to tell everybody this is how many people we have fed, and this is how many utility bills we've paid. And I mean, it's clear. It's clear what they're doing. And does that make us feel better when it's clear? Like when we can look at a report like MIFA's report and say, yeah, I feel good because I was part of feeding all those seniors. So I feel good about that. Does that I know where that money went. I didn't just give them money and I don't know what happened to it. I gave them money and I actually know what happened to it. Does that help you at all, Regina?
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
The
absolutely. And I think the
transparency.
transparency and I know most parishes are not equipped or to do a report on, I think they could, but I think that if more churches provided data, because some people
Mhm.
are very data driven, but some people are visually driven. So you can show me a spreadsheet all day about what you did, but if, like you said, you look outside the church property and all this abject poverty is around, it's like, okay, you the numbers say this, but like, what are we really doing with that? So yeah, I think seeing it is believing. Thomas, having a Thomas moment,
Hmm.
seeing is believing. So yeah, I think could we get back to that? I think we could get closer to the Acts moment that these disciples were having. Um, if things were more transparent, they were transparent here. If this is the if this is the example, then it should be the example, right? I mean, if this is what the first apostles did, showing people what they did, why can't we do that?
That's a good question. I don't know. Anybody else got any thoughts about that?
One thing that came to mind is thinking how they, met each other's needs. You can't really meet a need unless you're aware of it. And at least
Hmm. Hmm.
talking about needs isn't really something that's on the surface of a lot of conversation. So I wonder if we were more open with what the needs are just within the smaller community, um, thinking if the response would be greater, similar to what we saw with the MIFA, the more the awareness went out about what it is, what it does, the greater response we saw.
Well, I'm going to take it a step farther because I'm going to kind of take it closer to home with worshiping communities. Um, it was one of the things that I think worshiping communities may fall, some may fall down a little bit, some don't, but some may fall down a little bit. Do we really know our neighbors? Like the need that's outside our door. Do we really know our neighbors? And what are we doing to know our neighbors? How are we trying to engage with neighbors, whether they think they want to come and through our church service or not? Like whether they ever want to sit through a church service. What are the things that we do to help us know our neighbors? And how do we become a place that's a resource for our neighbors so that they're aware? The church may not be able to meet your every need, but the church can at least point you in the direction of things that could help meet your need. Um, One of the things that the church that I served in Tennessee, we isolated particular things where we knew we could give assistance and do that pretty well. Like we isolated some specific things that we felt like this is a place where we think we can do this well. We can't touch what some other folks are already doing. Like there were already two churches near us that had robust food pantries. We didn't need to duplicate that. Like that didn't need to be a thing for us, but we need to be able to tell them there's a food pantry over that way and there's a food pantry over that way, and these are their hours because we're going to just let them have that space. And we gave gifts to both of those food pantries. Like to say that we're not going to get in your space because you're doing that and you're doing it well, but we're going to write you a check so that if we refer people to you, we are helping that ministry that you're doing. And by the same token, we kind of got to a place where there was a lot of communication among the clergy about how we were helping other people so that we didn't just trip over each other trying to help folks. And we could be a lot more coordinated in our efforts around trying to help somebody who might have just gotten out of the hospital and needed particular support or something like that. And we quickly text each other and go, okay, so and so is here. How do we all kind of help make this work out better for this person instead of all of us just tripping over each other? Um, so yeah, there's a need to know neighbors, and there's also a need to know the things that we do well and the things that we can turn over to others. And just say we don't need to run the food pantry. If there's food pantries in either direction of us within a mile, we don't need to be the place that has the food pantry. But we need to support the food pantry that's within a mile of us so that when we're sending people to the food pantry, it's not, oh, we're just sending them to you. We're also supporting that ministry because that's a ministry we know we don't need to duplicate. Um, it's all those things. It's all those things. But now we're going to get to a little more troubling part of the text, and it's going to sound a little more Old Testament-y. That's what I say about it. It sounds a little more Old Testament-y. A man named Ananias, not to be confused with the Ananias who finds Saul, but a man named Ananias, with the consent of his wife Sapphira, sold a piece of property. With his wife's knowledge, he kept back some of the proceeds and brought only a part and laid it at the apostles' feet. Ananias, Peter asked, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back part of the proceeds of the land? While it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, were not the proceeds at your disposal? How is it that you have contrived this deed in your heart? You did not lie to us, but God. Now, when Ananias heard these words, he fell down and died, and great fear seized all who heard of it. The young men came and wrapped up his body, then carried him out and buried him. After an interval of about 3 hours, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. Peter said to her, tell me whether you and your husband sold the land for such and such a price. And she said, yes, that was the price. Then Peter said to her, how is it that you've agreed together to put the Spirit of the Lord to the test? Look, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out. Immediately she fell down at his feet and died. When the young men came in, they found her dead. So they carried her out and buried her beside her husband. And great fear seized the whole church and all who heard of these things. So here we get that kind of Old Testament thing going on again, being smitten. You didn't do what you were supposed to do, and the smite has come and is taken you. Um, how do we react to hearing that text? How do we react to hearing that?
I bet they had a drop in membership after that.
That's good, Jenny.
Ba-dum-bum. Ba-dum-bum.
They might have. They might have. Or they might have been afraid to drop. I mean, all that fear. They might have been afraid to leave the membership because they might have been afraid, oh, if I leave, that'll be me. So I think I won't leave. I think I'll stay. And I also think I won't lie. But I mean, I do want to engage that text. I do want to engage that text. Do we do faithful things out of fear?
I'd be lying if I said I didn't at some point in time. Um, you know, I mean, I grew up missionary Baptist, so there's lots of fear and gnashing of teeth. And, you know, we were the big proponents of the Rapture series, and so, yeah, there's lots of fear, that I had growing up. Um, but I do think that when I first heard the text, today, I thought there's always going to be that one guy. There's always going to be that one guy that's like, we're just not going to get with the program. We're just going to do our own thing, and then they got to pay the price. Um, and I guess for us, for me, it was hard for the Old Testament-y part, because we're going to always be presented with those folks that are just going to do some wackadoodle mess that, it's just, this is not what we're doing, but you're going to just go left. Um, how do we address those folks? And, obviously, Jesus helps us do it a little bit differently, but is there a point where this is how you have to handle it? And I mean, obviously not striking people dead, but being more, assertive and not, wishy-washy, or not, gentle with the situation. That's what I thought about. Is there a time where I gotta just be like, okay, this is where it is. Yeah. You're, I can't unsee it kind of thing. So
And I think one thing that comes to mind for me is that we don't always tell ourselves that for every action that we choose, there's going to be a consequence. Now, some consequences might be minor consequences, but some consequences are stouter when we make choices about how we're going to behave around certain things. Some of the consequences are going to be stout consequences. Um, and when we make our choices, do we recognize that there can be consequences to those choices? And consequence is that's a neutral. That's not a good or a bad. That's there can be consequences to our choices. Some consequences are fabulous consequences that we don't anticipate. Some consequences are, gosh, probably should have known better than that one. Like if I get in my car and I have an open container of alcohol and I'm driving my car and I get stopped by the cops, well, yeah, that consequence of you're probably just going to go directly to jail because you have that open container of alcohol sitting there. Um, that's one of those you could kind of see that one coming if you actually got stopped by a cop.
but I do think in the church sometimes there are consequences for some and not for others. And so I think the way they handled it in the text was
Mhm.
easy to understand, because they're not setting the precedent that you get a pass because you have this outfit and you don't get a pass, and for me, I think I like the equity in that. I like that. I like the equity in that situation.
Well, I mean that brings up a whole different can of worms when we start talking about institutional church and consequences or lack thereof about things that churches cover up. Because churches have been known to cover up a whole lot of things. Um, Memphis had kind of a series of scandals that were all like back to back to back with clergy folk and things that had gotten covered up. And it's like, okay, it's the next one that's the front page of the newspapers. Can y'all just stop? Like, really, just stop this. Um, as if people assume that there won't be consequences to the things that happen.
Well, do you not think, just thinking about that one of the things that happens is people thinking rules don't apply to them?
Hmm.
You know, hubris with, I'm above, that rule does not apply to me. I mean, it's the same thing. I do think that happens. And I think perhaps the more power you have, the more likely or apt you are to fall into that trap. Um, Maybe that was the case with this couple. They had a lot, and they said, "Well, we'll just we'll do what we think we should." But the rule, they don't really mean us. God doesn't really mean us. That we'll go through the motions, but we won't fulfill the spirit, or just plain old rules not applying. Uh, this happens. And I really think the higher up, more power people have, the more inclined they are. And who was it? There was a saying about the Roman emperor had somebody in his ear reminding him that life was short or something. It's a classic thing, so that the emperor remembered that rules applied to him. And I think that's an example. I think that happens, like when you're talking about, uh, pastors or other people in authority, uh, church leadership. Those rules didn't apply to them. You know,
which is an unfortunate way for us to see the world.
I think it happens a lot.
Well, it happened then. I mean, for
Yeah.
whatever reason, they
Mhm.
decided they didn't need to do the thing and what everybody else was doing. Yeah, so
Well,
it's not brand new.
and it's kind of like, how do we hold the people to be accountable? Um, because I think in our society we're, balancing judging people and allowing people to have their personal freedoms, with holding them accountable to that which harms all of us, or benefits all of us. And I think our mindset so much is, just as long as they're not hurting us, it's it's okay. But where do you draw the line? You know, and I think it's a tough question. I really do.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
you know, what behaviors are acceptable and what are not in a community of believers. Particularly one where we're, supposed to forgive one another. But I don't think that means you necessarily ignore what happened. And I think
or as
true,
some people used to say, forgiving doesn't mean forgetting.
yeah. And I think too, to forget. I mean, I think there needs to be true repentance and turning away from that behavior or action that caused harm. So anyhow, but I do think, Dorothy, I think y'all are on something though, that rules not applying, that rule doesn't really apply to me. And oops, I got caught. And man, this is a lot worse than I thought it would be. This is serious stuff.
And I think it just amplifies around, for me, it amplifies around the idea that we're supposed to be supporting one another. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah, you've cheated God, but you've cheated the whole community
Yeah.
because the community was counting on that resource to be a
Mm-hmm.
resource to support everyone. I mean, you can take that broadly, take that out of physical assets and just say we have particular gifts and skills that
Mm-hmm.
we ought to be sharing
Yeah.
more broadly with the community and we choose not to. Well, we're not just cheating God in that instance. We're cheating everybody around us
Yeah.
because we're not giving graciously of whatever it is that we have that we could be sharing. Um, and that understanding of community, that understanding of dependence on each other, and that everything we have is because we are interdependent.
Mm-hmm.
That's as human beings, we struggle a lot with that. We want to tell ourselves this whole business about, pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps and all this stuff that we love to tell ourselves about how we got where we got and we
Mm-hmm.
didn't need anybody's help to get there. Um, and I don't know too many people who could even begin to make a claim that they are self-made. Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you make that claim. I don't know where you live and what you do that a whole community hasn't helped shape and form you.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, whatever it is you have, whatever it is you have, is something that a whole community has helped you
Hmm.
have.
And those are, I mean, those include intangibles. It's not just
Oh,
tangible.
yes.
I mean, I think that's, that's one of the things David and I've shared with our kids is, look, you have certain intangible qualities that a lot of people don't have. And it's, due to the family, the way you were raised and the schools you attended. And you just need to be aware of that when you're dealing, and also meaning, therefore, you have the responsibility um, to meet a higher standard, if you will. But yeah, and let me say this: I think our children do that. I mean, but I do think the intangibles are very much
Mhm.
as much of it as physical assets.
And I think it goes back, Bishop Dorothy, to your original point that if we look at the things that we have, whether it's our intellect, our, personality, our house, our whatever assets, tangible assets, it all came from God.
Yeah.
You know, if we looked at it that way, I totally agree with you. I don't know how anyone, although I've heard it, thousands of times in my lifetime now, say I'm a self-made person. I don't know how that's possible to say either, especially when you look at it through that lens.
Well, yeah, and very much with issues of privilege and people who've received, white privilege or any privilege who will not acknowledge that is a real problem.
Yep, I have to agree with that.
And and it's something that I run into a lot. Um, yeah, it's people just not understanding they've had certain benefits of the doubt that hasn't been given to a lot of other folks, and that there were benefits, and particularly a lot of the people who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, you know. But we were talking about community though, and I think this living in community, I think a lot of the Eastern traditions, I just think there's a better understanding traditionally how we're all linked together. That, uh, and I mean that through nature and everything, that no man is an island. I just think, uh, I think Buddhism, frankly, does a great job with that. And, um, and it's in studying that, I think it has helped me as much with my understanding of Christianity and my own faith, and coming to understand that as well. I think there's a lot of truth in all of it, but I think it naturally comes from that basis, is that, we're all together. None of us really, none of us can operate without everyone else. Yeah.
Yep. I'm always amazed by our sense of isolation and our sense that we don't need others, because in the course of any given day, I can't think of 5 minutes probably that I don't need somebody doing something. Like just contributing to what is the whole, whether it's as simple as people obeying other traffic rules when you're driving your car. I mean, you realize how much confidence we have that people are going to obey traffic rules every single time we get behind the wheel of a car. We are confident that other people are going to stop at that red light.
I'm not.
We're confident that people are going to do what they're supposed to do, because we'd all stop driving if we lost that confidence. Like if we lost that confidence, we'd all stop and we'd say, "Oh, I don't want to get behind the wheel of a car anymore because I no longer trust that anybody will do anything." Well, we trust that the food that we buy at the grocery store is safe to eat. that growers have done the things they need to do and the food that we buy is safe to eat. And then we're stunned when we find out, about certain illnesses that come from some of our food because it didn't get cleaned properly and things didn't happen. We count on people for everything. We count on somebody along the way for absolutely every aspect of our existence. We count on our pharmacist to get our prescription right and not to send us home with the wrong medicine. We count on our doctor to diagnose us well and not miss something that is wrong with us. Um, we count on teachers to teach our kids. Like, how on earth can we ever say we don't count on other people for pretty much everything? Um, because without other human beings, we don't eat, we don't have a place to live, because somebody had to build that house that we're living in unless we built it ourselves. And that's pretty few folks. That's few and far between if they built it themselves. So we counted on a home builder. We counted on somebody paving streets. We have counted on somebody doing everything. And how do we have a sense of community around the fact that we need all of those things to happen and we need them to happen all the time? And what do we owe? What do we all collectively owe the community for all the things that we all know we're going to have from the community? That's a lot. That's a lot to think about. Because I don't think any of us are really living in that kind of isolation. There's a handful of survivalists who are. They're growing their own food and they're off grid and they're creating their own power. I know there's a handful of those folks, but that's not the majority of us. The
No,
majority
but
of us are not off grid.
I think the digital age that we're in allows us to believe that we can isolate. And I think, particularly with the younger generations, I think it's a real issue than giving this false belief that we can go it alone. Um, and I think that has contributed to it. And again, I think this is for me the way I view it is since I lose so much trust. There's that word, the trust word. In larger organizations, whatever institution, I do have a belief. I continue to have a belief that small communities with well identified vision uh, can make a difference. I think a lot of them can be faith based. Um, and it is my thought that these small communities can be tied together, even though we don't know it, and can make a difference, and that is what will save us and carry us through to some of the threats that we face right now, and get us back to where we can be. Um, I have to hold on to that because the larger picture is just so overwhelming. So plugging in, uh, David and I right now, we're working with some gardens here in town that are,
Mhm.
It's a neighborhood garden. And we don't really know how to garden, but we believe in the leadership in that garden. And we know by showing up and just doing whatever they
Do
ask.
what they tell you. I said, do what
That's
they
right.
tell you.
We just do what she tells us. And I do think it makes a difference in this community that we live in. And I think it gets us, just like delivering MIFA meals, puts us in a place where it's real and we're connecting and it is good for us. I'm not saying we're not saving anybody. We are just getting our roots into real Memphis. And it's I do think it's opportunities like that and small movements like that, and there are a lot of them.
There are.
And I think it's just up to all of us. This is the stage we couldn't have done this when we were younger, but we are retired now, and so uh, I have a lot of faith in this. I trust this program. Yeah, and there are many
Somebody's eating.
others. There are many others. I mean, we are fortunate in Memphis. I mean, MIFA. I mean, talking about trust. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, anyhow.
Well, yeah, somebody's eating because somebody's gardening. I mean, I
Yeah.
just remember hearing somebody a few years ago saying, I don't know anything about gardening, but I can do what they tell me to do. So
Yeah.
I can show up with some tools, and if they tell me to go weed this, I can go weed it.
Yeah.
If they tell me to do whatever, I can do the thing that they tell me to do. And then I come back and I see that even though I'm not a skilled gardener, somebody's going to eat. There's zucchini growing on that plant, and
Mhm.
so that's going to be in a basket, and somebody's going to get to eat that zucchini.
Well,
Um,
and that people who live in that neighborhood will come and work in that garden too, and that we'll work together and we'll get to know one another.
mhm.
And a lot of the people who live there they're immigrants, primarily from North Africa, and uh, it's been really, I mean, it's been good for David and I to understand how it is for someone to come here from another country as a refugee.
Mhm.
And it's good to see that there are programs in place very much supporting folks in their day-to-day living and in helping them get settled here and to care for their families
Yep.
and to be safe.
Anybody else got any last thoughts before we wrap up for today? Acts is so rich and gives us so much stuff to think about in our modern world, about how we, like these disciples, truly understand what it means to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
Um, we're all a work in progress, and we're all still learning, and we're all still trying to get there. So I'm glad that folks are interested in learning more about this book, because it is one of my favorite books in the Bible, because it's just revelatory all the way through about how we struggle to make meaning of this discipleship journey. So,
Mhm.
all right, y'all. Thank you so much. I will see you hopefully next week. And until then, be well and take care. Bye.
Bye.